Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to the Mico University College online conference on climate change and environmental education. You know, in more recent times, the phenomenon climate change has become very important to us in this global community. And the Mico University College feels that it is important that we should be a part of the discourse that takes place as it relates to climate change. Now, this morning, we will be having a keynote speaker. In a little while, I will be introducing that individual. But before I do so, I'd like to ask our president, Dr. Asbun Pinnock, to bring welcome and opening remarks. Dr. Pinnock, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Good morning, everyone. Professor Michael Taylor, Ambassador Byron Blake, Dr. Susan Otukan, and forgive me for the pronunciation, and you may correct me. I'll take that. Mr. Hushim, Ms. Carol Elizabeth Ross, other specially invited guests, our host, colleague, Mr. Lawson, Director of ITA, Professor Hutton, Mrs. Alvaranga, and all the other officers from ITA, colleagues, guests all. Good morning. On behalf of the board and management of the Mico, I welcome you to the third staging of ITA's annual conference. This year, we feature climate change and environmental education. This conference is timely, as we no longer have the luxury of observing from the sidelines as bystanders, watching environmental and climate change issues unfold. The time has come for us to work toward becoming active participants in the development and execution of solutions to save the only home we know, our blue planet, our environment. Make no mistake about the perceived symbiotic relationship between man and his environment. Yes, equality is important, but there's no equality when it comes to man and the earth. We need the earth more than the earth needs us. Therefore, the onus is on us to put in place the systems and policies to preserve it. After all, if we do not take care of our environment, where shall we live? Where shall our children live? The degradation of our environment and issues of climate change, they are real. Over the last 2 decades, we have become increasingly, my script is jumping all over the place. We are becoming increasingly aware of the effects of climate change. Weather patterns have become more extreme, droughts have become more intense, storms have become bigger, and the earth is getting hotter. The ice in the permafrost region is melting, and the sea levels are rising. And though Jamaica is relatively mountainous, our low-lying areas are prone to flooding, as we have seen in the past few years. All these are the result of climate change. And as these weather climate and events wreak havoc on our natural and man-made environment, we realize the effectiveness of our ability to respond. We must raise environmental and climate change consciousness and embrace protective and mitigative actions as a matter of urgency. Now is the time for us to dig in our heels and to roll up our sleeves, hunker down, and fix the problems that beset us locally and globally. This is the only way to secure a better future for our succeeding generations. Environmental issues are long-term, and as such, are not always attractive to those who want the quick fix and instant gratification. and those who are focused on bread and butter issues, thinking that the environment is not. But that, colleagues and friends, is tantamount to myopia, tantamount to being a contributing architect to the slow, painful death of our planet Earth. Recent floods and result of the outer bands of tropical storm here have not only proven once again how ill-prepared we are, but worse, there is fear in some quarters that as we approach the Christmas season, food security may be compromised as a result of this hurricane that did not impact us directly. Therefore, we can conclude that environmental issues are indeed bread and butter issues. Therefore, it is time to act. The time to act is now, not tomorrow, not next year, but now. Many of us are already setting our behaviors and our attitudes, setting our own ways. And so the mandate must be to educate the decision makers, policy makers, movers and shakers of tomorrow. In other words, our children. We applaud the various schools which have green clubs and are involved in the process of environmental education. Issues of climate change and the protection of the environment are already integrated in the programs of the Mico University College. In our Faculty of Science and Technology, we are making plans to ensure that this is reflected in our curriculum. They're also on full steam ahead, moving towards the setting up of our Mico STEAM Center, which will focus on raising the profile of the output of science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. We will integrate the teaching about climate change and the environment into the output of our STEAM Center so that our graduates are equipped to teach an environmental education infused curriculum to students at all levels, beginning at the pre-primary and ending at the tertiary level. The Mico will seek to operate as one of the torchbearers at the forefront of development of climate change and environmental education in Jamaica. Our aim is to work with the established local, regional, and global organizations to conduct research which will be used to guide policymakers and to ensure that environmental education is entrenched in the curriculum of Jamaican schools. It is time for us to rewrite the script and shift the mindset of our people towards being good stewards of the environment. As good citizens of Jamaica and as good citizens of the world, we must be environmentally conscious. Though our carbon footprint may be pale in comparison to that of developed nations, we must plan and act now to place environmental issues on the front burner. To ignore will be the architect of our own peril. Education about environmental change and the environmental is everybody's business. It is my hope that coming out of this conference, we will be armed with clear plans and directions to achieve this goal. Our children must see themselves as custodians of the environment in which they live. And they must understand that they cannot live without a good, healthy environment. Our generation may not reap the benefits of the decision made at this conference, but every generation has an obligation to leave behind a legacy greater than that which we inherited. A mandate for environmental education in our schools, let this be our legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Once again, thank you for participating and join us as we do it with our might. Thank you. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful conference. God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pinnock, for having established the protocol for this conference and welcoming our panelists who will actually be sharing. Well, my name is Alvin Lawson, and I will be taking you through this segment of the conference. Now, as I said before, there is a keynote speaker who at this time I want to introduce. Our keynote speaker is Ambassador Byron Blake. And Ambassador Blake will be sharing with us against the background, the Caribbean and the cross-share of climate change. What has the region done and can do? Ambassador Blake, I want to welcome you and ask at this time that you share with this conference.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Could I ask Dr. Alvaranga to share some notes which I circulated? Okay. Now, let me begin, Chairman, by following your footsteps and saying that protocols haven't been established. I will not go any further into protocol matters. Fact is, time is short. Time perhaps has expired. Dr. Pinnock said that the conference was timely. Let me say 2022, 30 years after the Rio Conference, 50 years after the Stockholm Conference. Stockholm was on human environment. Rio was on environment and development, so you see a movement. And we are now 30 years from that. So we are 50 years into, since we have recognized that human beings are in fact making a devastating impact on the environment. 2022, perhaps, you know, the master has a design. So 2022 is perhaps one of the hottest years, or the hottest year, the wettest year, the most devastating climatic events, and those range from fire to floods. And turns out that the floods were not extinguishing the fires, because you know, it just so happens that the world is so set up that some things, well, it balances itself. So what happens in one area, the opposite is going to happen in the other. And you wouldn't be surprised if we perhaps have in some places the coldest winter, because the environment is a system, it's a natural system, and it balances itself. So it means that we have to now see where we are. But there's something else about 2022. The last IPP report suggests that 2022, we will reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius in annual ambient increase, which we had always seen as a trigger point for catastrophic situations, especially for small islands. So we are at a pivotal year. I put that to set the context of the fact that we have no time. Now, one of the things you'll find from this presentation, you will see no footnotes, because really, they are really head notes. They are really my notes of what has been happening and what we have been involved in, certainly heavily over the last 30 years, which is more or less 40. I wasn't in the 72 Stockholm, so I can't speak to that too much. But to get us off, let me just, and since we're talking about now, not just climate change, but with education, let me just comment on a couple of things in terms of language. We are in the habit of talking about natural disasters. So if we have a flood, we say it's a natural disaster. If we have a hurricane, we say it's a natural disaster. If we have a drought, we say it's a natural disaster. Let me just suggest that that terminology is totally wrong. These are natural hazards, but hazards which, in terms of man's actions since the first industrial revolution, and in particular, over the last 100 years, and certainly the last 50 years, human action has created so much more and make these natural hazards, which would normally take place, so much more disastrous. So the disaster is really from two senses. One is poor planning. Poor planning. So a natural hazard becomes a real disaster where there was not the planning to ensure that these things which will happen, that the impacts not as great as we have been seeing. And secondly, our failure to prepare ourselves to respond when the hazards occur. So because we are not prepared in terms of how we respond when the hazards occur, they become even more disastrous. So I want us to take out the vocabulary, out of our vocabulary, that a hurricane or a storm is a hazard, is a disaster. It becomes a disaster because we did not plan and we worsen the conditions. All right? But natural hazards have always taken place, these natural phenomena. The second thing in terms of climate change, and when we started the discussion on climate change, certainly in the 70s, 80s, we're thinking of it in terms of significantly the warming. But of course, if you have warming, you're going to have cooling somewhere else. But we're focused on the warming, so we speak about global warming. But we should have in our minds that really we have the change. And it is not even so much the change, but the variability. In other words, 1 year it's up, 1 year it's down, except that man has so succeeded that, say, since 2016, it's perhaps only 1 year where, from the point of view of warm, where we have not been the hottest on record, succeedingly. So we have created those conditions that we're going to say, how did we create those conditions? I also want to throw out about the term development. If a road is being built somewhere, we say it's a development. If some trees have been cut down to do something, we say it's a development. Now that is one of the most unfortunately used term in our recent time. A development is something which is an activity which improves the situation and therefore is sustainable. So you notice that I didn't have sustainable development defined here, because sustainable development is really a contradiction. Well, tautology, because a set of activities cannot be considered to be development unless they are sustainable, right? But we're at the point where at least we will now talk about sustainable development. But let us don't get into our children's head the idea that a road, a couple houses, these project activities that these are developments, because as we have experienced over the last 30 or so years, a lot of these are catastrophic. In fact, they are the opposite to development. They are anti-development. And in Jamaica's case, you can look at our bauxite industry, right? Anti-development. We'll speak to the question of, for the vocabulary, what we have there, SIDS, small island developing states. When we speak to that, we also include low-lying coastal states. So for example, in the Caribbean, when we say we are SIDS, we also include the big Guyanas and the big Belizes, because they just have so much part of the territory, which is low-lying and therefore subject to flood. In fact, Guyana is perhaps the most vulnerable, the largest of all our countries, because until you get to about 30 miles in, you don't get up to sea level. So Guyana has to protect itself by a massive wall, which had been there for years, has to be maintained and so forth. So while when we say small island developing states, we include all low-lying coastal states. And that goes, across the world, in fact. Big countries like the US and so don't realize that the Mississippi Delta is so susceptible, and you only figure it out when you have a hurricane and you have the waters rising. Similar things in places like India and Bangladesh and so forth. I distinguish small island developing states from small economies simply because in the United Nations, the economic activities are handled in one set of forum, and the climate and the developmental, from that point of view, activities are handled somewhere else. So one set is handled in New York, and another set is handled in Geneva. So we make that distinction, but that's really for negotiating purposes. And really, if you have good negotiators, they integrate the knowledge so that they bring from the negotiation and discussion in one area into the other area. We have the question of the integration of knowledge. And Dr. Pinnock will speak to the question of the STEAM Center and integrating the climate activity into the STEAM program. Let me go further, Professor Pinnock, and say that it has to be integrated into all of your programs, because a large part of our adverse impact on the environment is because we are in our orientation. We don't have a general orientation to recognize what is happening. And we don't, for example, when I was going up to school, primary school, you had the school garden and you're measuring had your wind gauge and all that type of stuff. Now, we have to get back to those, and we have to be sure that in our general attitude and behavior, that we are, in fact, climate sensitive, environment sensitive. So it's largely a sensitivity question. And sensitivity, I want to suggest, ought to be infused through all your subjects, because in a sense, it is not only a sensitivity to the natural environment, you also have to have a sensitivity to the living creatures, your animals, your other human beings, and all of these, that you are impacting all of these when you impact what we call the natural environment in a certain way. They throw the plastic into the gutter, and the plastic finally gets into the sea, and it gets out, and it gets into the fishes and the whales and all of these. So we are impacting life, not only of plants or animals, and not only our own lives, but also the sensitivity training becomes critical. All right. And the final point I'll make on the vocabulary is that in a real sense, we are in a situation where knowledge is increasing and is evolving and is changing. Remember I said they started in 72 talking about human environment. Then in 92, we spoke about the environment and development. And in fact, by 94, so we're talking about sustainable development. So you see, the language is improving, and it improves as we have knowledge, increased knowledge. And we have to keep that going and look at the language and make sure that as educators, we are communicating with our students in the right language and in the most modern language. Now, I've said all of those by way of background, but the Caribbean, you know, even before we got to the conference in Rio, there are a couple of things that were happening in the 70s which struck us, and we took action against them, but perhaps not necessarily for the right reason. When we had the energy price increases in 1973, and again in 79. That impacted our production, it impacted our trade. And as a region, we responded very quickly, and we actually developed a regional food plan, approved in 1976. Most of us would know it. Jamaica actually had a food plan in 77. More importantly, we developed a regional energy action plan. That plan was finalized in about 1982, by which time we had a whole change now. The oil prices had come down, and we started thinking that we're good. So the international community did not take us on. When we took that plan to the World Bank, said, boy, it's the best plan we have seen, but it's not urgent. There's no crisis. And our governments bought into that, even though they were A, not producing any significant oil apart from Trinidad and Tobago, and B, that the impact on us from what was happening, and we didn't recognize them as the related slight change of the climate and so forth. But in that regional energy action plan, it had 4 branches, 4 large. One was alternate energy, right? And you realize once you start talking alternate energy, then you're going to be talking things like forest and so forth, which will positively impact. Then there was the question of energy management and conservation. Then there was the question of education, training, and all of those matters. And then there was the question of technology and development. So all 4 branches, when you look at all 4 branches, it was complete and across the board. But we forgot it. So much so that few of you would know that there was an energy management diploma set up at the University of the West Indies. The center, which came up as the Sustainable Development Center, came out of those discussions, and that was funded and had a professor, Professor Albinger, who was supported by one of the large companies in Jamaica. Subsequently, another company funded another professor, supposedly of sustainable development. The two never came together. And sustainable development means that you have to come together. You know, but I'm not going to go into that now, but I'm just saying that we had foreseen these things. We had foreseen the question, especially of conservation, so forth. The architectural school at UTech came out of those discussions. And in fact, the person who came to first head of that center came out of the program in the Caribbean Development Bank, which was really where the technology side of the energy plan was based. All right, so we had a response. The next thing which struck us in that 70s was really, we began to hear the islands in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean begin to say that they are in fact being inundated, and they had faced an existential crisis. And because we ourselves were having these increasingly strong hurricanes and storms in the 70s, starting at the end of the 70s and going into the 80s, we were recognizing at least that we were having these events being quite tight within the links. So you had Hurricane David in 79, which devastated Dominica. You had Hurricane Harvey 81, you had Floyd 81, you had a series of them coming down. And for Jamaica's audience, you had Gilbert in 88. In Jamaica's case, we had not had a major hurricane hitting since 51. So we all had forgotten all that hurricane meant. And Gilbert destroyed. So all of those matters caused us to really begin to take a much more serious look. And because the 20-year review of the Stockholm Conference was coming up in 92, we had to begin our preparations for that. So those are the things that began to force action, and there are two major actions which came up with out of the Caribbean. One was we actually spearheaded the formation of the Alliance of Small Island Developing States, Small Island States, AOSIS. Most people would not realize that that concept was developed and promoted by two Trinidadians, in fact. One was the Minister of Energy then, Mr. Lincoln Myers, and the other was by my colleague, no, how do I forget her name? I remember her name just now. She was then in CARICOM Secretariat as a director like myself. Those were the two Caribbean people, and the Caribbean therefore headed and carried that AOSIS for several years. We also, if you bring up a little for me, bring up the presentation a little bit. We also, as a Caribbean, then realized that we had to organize ourselves for the negotiations which were coming. And therefore, we decided, and the government decided that you had to have a Caribbean coordinated arrangement. And it was actually organized under the chairmanship, the coordination of the President of Guyana, who then had lead responsibility for environmental matters. Among other things, some of you will remember that Guyana made 1 million acres of its forest available to the international community in 89 for research on these matters, how you could sustainably use forests. So that coordination was under Guyana's coordination. So we were then able to coordinate our preparations for the 1992 conference, but that preparation really had very, very serious work from about 89. And you had preparatory meetings in a range of areas and in various places, particularly in the UN. But for a small region like the Caribbean to have been effective, it was the coordinated approach. So we would develop the region's position. We would negotiate the region's position into the developing country's position. And then, of course, with the developing countries, now we'll go and defend that in the negotiations at the general UN level. Now, just to say that to negotiate the position of small islands into the developing countries or the G77 and China position was not easy, because the major contradictions was really within that group. The oil producers were part of the G77. And then we saw oil as a critical anti-environmental factor. And the smallest and most troubled islands were in that group. So one had to see that. But we're able to carry through that. That conference also envisaged work, especially on forests. And the Caribbean, in terms of our coordination on forest, that was coordinated by a forester out of Suriname, which was not even yet a member of CARICOM, but we saw the entire Caribbean as being what we had to work with, because just the CARICOM islands could not swing anything anywhere significant, right? So that for that very broad-based conference, we had this coordinating machinery. And I want to suggest that that coordinating machinery continued very, very much for all the negotiations we had, including the Hemispheric Conference, which was held in Bolivia in 1996 on sustainable development. And the other UN conferences. The most important conference which came out of the conference in Rio was that we're able to get a conference on the small islands, to focus specifically on the small islands and what the impacts, global impacts were on the small islands. That was held in '94 in Barbados. Suffice it to say that the UN was really, of course, charged to organize the conference. But the UN had time for big people, not for little people. So the UN didn't really take on the organization. So the Caribbean had to take on the organization of that conference. Anybody who tell you otherwise, tell them I say that the Caribbean which took on that organization and in fact pulled off a very successful conference. But of course we had the other members of AOSIS with us because we had the group going. As I say, other conferences which occurred around about the same time. There are other conferences which occurred around about the same time as a part of the system. There was a conference on women. There was a conference on women. There was a conference on population development, and there was a conference on human settlements. All of these, the Caribbean went into them, the very coordinated position, right? As I said, that coordination took place up to where we had this 10-year review of the Rio plan. So that was in 2002 in South Africa. That's where you had that 10-year review. Caribbean was very organized there. We actually had our position going. We thought that we had things under control when it came to the penultimate night before the end of the conference, or the day before. And the Caribbean was holding very, very hard line. What is that we wanted? the chair of the conference, it was South Africa, developing country, yes. The chair of the conference at about 7 o'clock adjourned the negotiations for 10 o'clock the next morning. Caribbean people, Bahamas was speaking in plenary, went off to listen to the Bahamas speak in plenary. By the time some messengers got to us and said the technical conference had resumed, and we got there just to hear the decision being made. So you see, coming out, we see what that came out like a good result and so forth. And if you read it, the top lines, it sounds like a good result. But the truth is that that 2002 conference got the major countries off the hook in terms of what they really needed to do. All right, no, don't go up any further. Yes, all right. Got them off the hook. And the Caribbean was strict. As I say, beware of your friends, because it was the South Africa chair that tricked us. What we hadn't recognized, really, we were focused on the oil producing countries. And we hadn't focused on the coal producing and the coal using countries. That's all the major coal producers were South Africa, Australia, major coal users like India and China. So we blinked on those and were tricked. Anyway, so I just went down that line to show, and I want to say that as we train our people and so forth, we have to understand that in international relations, countries tend to focus on their own interests, and you have to know what your interest in the country or region is. Deal with that. So that happened there. Let me just go back to say that coming out of the Rio and slightly after that, the UN recognized that they had to set up a committee on climate, on sustainable development. And that committee on sustainable development worked within the UN. And again, the Caribbean coordinated its position in that, because that was now where a lot of the nitty-gritty discussions took place in between major conferences. And as we indicate, the Caribbean had the good fortune of chairing the group of 77 and China for 2 of those early meetings, 2005 Jamaica and 2008 Antigua and Barbuda. And therefore we're able to hold the line, including forcing a 5-year review in 2007. But in 2005, the meeting had wanted to delay. So we held that, and therefore there was that institutional arrangement in the United Nations. It's still there, the Committee on Sustainable Development. We have to make sure continue our position. All right, just to run things and to begin to show where we began to have a real change. When we were preparing for the conference in Stockholm in 2009, by which time, and over all this period, we recognize that the developed countries have every year fallen further and further back from their commitments. And with the report of the IPCC, the 4th report in 2007, which sounded the alarm that unless very, very serious work was done, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation, that the world was going to be in very serious trouble. So it was agreed that the 2 years between that and Stockholm will be taken to organize how the developed countries would really put on paper how they were going to reduce their emissions, because so far, following from Rio, every year they were increasing their emissions instead of reducing. So they were supposed to put on paper how they were going to do that. And secondly, how they were going to help, can hold it at that. Hold it. How they were going to help the smaller countries and those without heavy technology and so to really adjust to. When you see the term adaptation, it's really a matter of trying to adjust to things, you know. Like in Jamaica, you see I usually say to people that the seawall which you put up out that on the Palisades Strip, I usually say to people that that era was there all the years, and there was no major flooding. We didn't have to put up a wall. We had to put up a wall when the floods and the movements became so severe. So it was a matter of adaptation. Now we had somebody who thought we put it up and say it was going to be a great economic activity and so. But we didn't try to get it funded from adaptation. But I'm saying that the fourth review, actually, is that those 2 years should be spent how the developed countries are going to bring down in real terms, put down their timetable, their emissions, and how they were going to support the developing countries. The developed countries adopted a strategy, which was that they came and they started saying what big developing countries like China and so had to do. That prompted, of course, a lot of animosity, and as you said, we got off trying to argue and defend that and so. So certainly for the first year of that discussion, there was no discussion on the timetable under which the developed countries were going to reduce their emissions. By the time we got to the second year, and we got close to the conference, some major developed countries decided that they will go to the really small islands and affected countries and offer to bribe them. So, for example, you had the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and that's Blair, and the President of France, Sarkozy, come to a heads meeting or a senior meeting in the Caribbean in Grenada. Now, from the time you see France and England coming, you should be suspicious. Anyway, they came and they proposed that we should shift from the 1.5 as outer limits and support the idea of 2.0. And the Caribbean, which was at the time chaired by, I was chairing the G77, the Caribbean was forced. Grenada was chairing, and Grenada was the last man out, stuck out, and then finally somebody, you know, we Caribbean people are witty. What's the difference? What 0.5 would make? They folded. Of course, by the time they went back to New York and start trying to change back, Australia had done the same thing in the Pacific, and France had done the same thing with the islands of Africa. So even though when we went to Copenhagen, people were still speaking about the 1.5, those major countries knew that they had us over the barrel. So you came out of Copenhagen with a very loose position about it, you know, on less than 2. And of course, we then went to Paris, and we then went back to Rio for the 20th, Rio plus 20, and actually backed off all those. So between 20 to 2009, and 2012. We allowed the developed countries off the hook. And that is what we are now reaping. That is why we are now at the stage where 1.5 is predicted to hit at this year, if not this year, next year. As we took our eyes off the ball and we started to allow the developed countries to, and I use the term, not advisedly, I use them, bribe us. Right? That bribe still continued until we went to Edinburgh. And you realize in Edinburgh that was a totally failed activity, so I'll come back to that. All right. So the question which now arises, and I know I've been running out over time. So the question which arises is that in 2020, where and what must the Caribbean pull up? What must the Caribbean do? Right? What must the Caribbean do? On my way to that, let me just say that one of the things that the Caribbean did in the period leading up to now, they invested quite a bit in persons who are in, hold it there, in the scientific work. And it established institutions like the Climate Change Center in Barbados. And it participated very heavily and collaboratively in the work of the United Nations agencies. So much so that when the report, the IPCC report from 2007 was granted the Nobel Prize, sharing it with Vice President Al Gore, that about 22 scientists were recognized as lead and were sort of recognized as being part of the Nobel. Of that, 3 were from the Caribbean. Leonard Nurse from Barbados, Anthony Chen from Jamaica here, and John Agar from Trinidad. And I don't know how they had structured the report. It was a large report. But there were 2 other Caribbean persons who were lead in other areas of the report. So we had like 5 persons, 3 out of 22, and 5 out of whatever number. So that was investment. I suspect that persons like our lead speaker tomorrow is now heart and center. So we are continuing that. So Brother Michael, a lot is going to rest on your shoulders. But I say that to say that we now have to get back to significant, not only training, but keeping people involved in those negotiations which are taking place and which have to take place. All right. And we have to use our institutions like the Climate Change Center, which when we established it, we had no resource. The government decided we're not going to fund it, but we found a way to establish that as an independent center, very, very capable center. And it also provides for training. Will you pull up a bit? Pull up some more. No, up the other direction. The other direction. No, man, other direction, opposite direction. All right. Going up a little more. Now we're going forward. How we stay with time? 5 more minutes?
Well, time is actually up, sir.
Well, so I take 5 more minutes, Ambassador of Privilege. In terms of what we have to do right now, given where we are at, I think the first thing that Caribbean governments have to do is that they now have to abandon the level of comfort that they have developed with the developing countries over the last almost well, 25, no, 15 years, almost 15 years. They have to abandon that comfort because we now have to make very radical change. So first level, abandon that level of comfort. 2, we have to now go back and really re-strengthen the alliance of small island states so that the OCs can really get back into gear. We are fortunate because coming out of the field summit in Edinburgh, coming out of that field summit, the young people have established a virtual island innovation network. And they have been having conferences and they have been meeting and so. So the young are engaged. The young are engaged and the young are not only engaged, but because of technology now, they can be connected. So I'm suggesting that our leaders have to join into that, recognizing that they can't take over that again. They shouldn't try to take over, but become active participants so that they and the young people can lead the kind of revolutionary change and discussion which need to take place as we confront the various issues. Thirdly, we have to revamp our information and our education arrangements. And well, Professor Pinnock had begun to speak to the educational arrangements. The information arrangement, we have to revamp that information arrangement. And we have to put out the information as it is, as it's coming out, so we can see the dilemma in which we are. And I want to suggest that 2022, although we have missed the UN session for this year, but 2022 going into 2023, that the Caribbean needs to use this time now to organize itself and to force on the international agenda, the United Nations agenda, the fact that with these unprecedented climatic events, that we have to make critical change. Now, it is true that the other global things are happening in terms of war and so forth are diverting attention, but we have to pull back attention because it is existential for us, and we have to get that going. All right, and you who are in education, even though the training which you do now, well, the orientational type of training will have early effect, but the fundamental type of training going back down to young, very young, which has to be done, that is going to take years to have real fusion. But if children begin to recognize and you have them do, for example, what we used to do in the old days, where you would have a compost heap and you have compost with the perishable, composable stuff, and you have one with plastics, and every time they dig out, they want with the decomposable stuff, that they see that, and they dig up the one with the plastics again and see that Mr. Plastic is there the same way, they will begin to get the point over time. So we have to shift our higher level education and our base education to begin to recognize. Thank you very much, colleagues. Sorry for running over the time, but you know, there are some things which are just so fundamental and so important that I can't hurry them too much. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Blake. You're almost 30 years having experience at various levels with responsibility for macroeconomic policy and planning, sectorial policy planning and development, infrastructure policy planning, and regional and international trade policy and negotiation, has fitted you with the skills and the knowledge to have shared so aptly with us here this morning. I want to take the opportunity in thanking you, sir. There will be a time for Q&A, and I'm sure you will have the opportunity to share some more with us at that time when those questions are fielded. Thanks again. One and all, I would like at this time for us to prepare for the other presenter, who is Dr. Susan Otuokon. Now, Dr. Otuokon is an environmental consultant with over 30 years work experience. She is the executive director of the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust. This is a civil society organization with the responsibility of overseeing the Blue and John Crow Mountain National Park and World Heritage Site. Dr. Otuokon has her PhD in ecotourism and its role as a tool for protected area management in the Caribbean. She has been one who has served on several boards, and we believe that with this background, she is the appropriate person at this time to add her voice to this discourse. Dr. Otuokon, welcome. You may present.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. Are you all hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Great. And I am sharing my screen and hoping that we can get started here. Okay. Yes. There we go. Okay. So good morning once again, and thank you so much to Mico, the Mico University College, for hosting this important conference and for inviting me to share and participate. And also thanks to Ambassador Byron Blake. I think he made some very important points and gave us some of the history, because we know that if we don't have an understanding of our history, we are prone to make the same mistakes again. And I think I'm going to try to remember at the end of my presentation to say something like, just do it, get what needs to be done, because to me, one of the messages I was hearing from Ambassador Blake, from his experience, we have been in a situation kind of waiting for others to lead the way, although we have been such leaders in this area, but decisions are often made outside of our scope by other countries, other entities. But if we are indeed in charge of our own present and future, then we need to take action. And the good thing about what we're talking about today is it's about our environment, everything around us. Climate change is around us, it's affecting us, and it's something though that we have been part of the cause. And it's something that we can do something about, even in our small way. Meanwhile, building young people and citizens who will understand that role and who will be lobbying for our government also to do what needs to be done. So having said that, I'm sharing here my presentation, which is Environmental Education in Jamaica opportunities for learning and critical thinking. And I did notice that was one of the things, again, that Ambassador Blake mentioned, that we needed to be developing in our people a certain sensitivity to our environment, everything around us. And it's not just the trees and the flowers, but our fellow citizens and our neighbors, whether we like them or not. So I'm going to start my presentation also by just sharing a little bit in terms of an overview of what I hope to cover. And I believe that education should be an enlightening experience, creating a love for learning, developing certain skills which will help us in terms of how to learn, so that even if we don't get through everything in the curriculum within the time, we have taught our children those observational, analytical, and reporting skills that will assist them in learning later on. And also, education should be developing other skills, not just academic and knowledge-based skills, but social, mental, and emotional skills, such as critical thinking, problem solving, and empathy. I am essentially positing that environmental education for sustainable development should be a tool, or is a tool, that can provide that enlightening experience. And I'm going to share with you some examples of the sources of information for content and practical activities, examples of places to visit, and examples of things from our environment closer to school. So that's what I hope to get through today. But before I start, just to share, from my own personal experience and concerns about this matter, is that, and maybe we can even take off the environmental education, because what I'm saying is that education is all about our everything around us. That's what we learn about. And so we need to ensure that our children are learning in this way that enhances their critical thinking. And so the topic really made me think about my first experience in the classroom around about 1987 as a teacher, where after university, having done life sciences, my first degree in life sciences, I went off to a high school and was teaching general science to grade 9 and biology at the Cape level, grades 12 and 13. And I remember, although Cape was not that far away, after having done my university degree, I remember being horrified at the amount of content, because now I was looking on as a teacher versus as a student, and probably not having been aware of all the things that perhaps my teachers should have covered in the curriculum. And my first thought, especially for the grade 13 students, was how am I going to get through all of this content that the curriculum is saying that I need to get through, bearing in mind when I came in and they hadn't had a teacher for a while, there was a gap there. And then later on, when my own daughter was at the school at the primary level, I remember one summer, and this was in the 1990s, early 2000. I remember her coming home for summer, handing me her general science book and saying that we need to cover pages, it was like about 3 or 4 chapters. And I said, okay, well, your teacher is still going to cover these with you when you go back in September, right? And she said, no, the teacher said, you must go through it because she won't have the time to go through it when we get back to school. And so we spent some of the summer doing the various exercises, and some of these were the physics section of the grade 5 or grade 6 curriculum. And to be honest, my background and my love is really biology and life sciences. So I struggled, but I imagined what were other parents going through if sciences were not in their background at all. I suspect some children just didn't do that section in the textbook, and then it wasn't covered later on. So I come at this with that concern that we are seeing an increasingly content-driven curriculum. And it appears that we may have lost the real purpose of education. And instead of it being an enlightening experience, which is the second listed Oxford Dictionary definition, it has become just the first part of the definition in the Oxford Dictionary, which is the process of receiving or giving systematic instruction, especially at school or university. So it has just become a process and a procedure, like a little checkbox, tick, tick, we did this, yes. But was it enlightening? Was it something useful? Was it relevant to our students? Did it pique their interest? And I can understand it must be hard. It was hard for me going into the classroom to come across the curriculum with, so content heavy. And so I imagine it must be hard for teachers at any level, primary, secondary, tertiary, to focus on not just transmitting the knowledge and information, but also developing a knowledge of how to learn, a love for learning, and key life skills to prepare young people for life in today's world. Environmental education provides an opportunity for learning in any subject area, and also to develop, as I've said before, critical thinking, problem solving, conflict resolution, kindness, empathy, amongst many other skills. As a small island developing state, Jamaica needs citizens with a clear understanding of environmental processes and issues and the threats to our own lives that inappropriate development activities result in. And I noted that Ambassador Blake mentioned that we keep talking about hurricanes as natural disasters, when yes, they are natural hazards, but they don't have to be disasters. And one of the reasons they are so much of a disaster nowadays is because of man-made overheating of our environment, and also where we have put things, what we make houses of, and so on. So it's critical that we have citizens who understand these issues and are able to think critically and come up with solutions. And we need a society also where people are mindful of others and life around them, and who can interact with our environment in a caring way. Not abusing animals. We know that's actually a sign that likely a child who is abusing animals is going to be abusive later on to other people. So environmental education is ultimately aimed at fostering appropriate attitudes and skills for sustainable development, not just in theory, but through practice. And I share with you the UNESCO definition of environmental education. It's a learning process that increases people's knowledge and awareness about the environment and associated challenges,
It develops the necessary skills and expertise to address the challenges, and it fosters attitudes, motivations, and commitments to make informed decisions and take responsible action. And if we look at that definition, and if we took out the word environmental, we would see that this is really what education needs to be. Because, as I said, our environment is everything around us. We need people who have a knowledge and awareness about every aspect of life. Later on, they will specialize in certain aspects of life, more area than other. But we need people who have the necessary skills and expertise to address the challenges, who have the motivation, the right attitudes to make informed decisions and take responsible action in life generally. I'll share another definition, which is that environmental education is a process that allows individuals to explore environmental issues, again, issues all around us, whether it's in the social environment, the natural environment, the physical environment, to engage in problem solving and take action to improve the environment. As a result, individuals develop a deeper understanding of environmental issues and have the skills to make informed and responsible definitions. So using those two definitions, I really want to share them and give examples of how I think the approach of environmental education is what we need to see throughout and across the board at all levels in all subject areas for education in order to result in the citizens we want to be developing. So just to share a little bit more about the components of environmental education according to that US Environmental Protection Agency: awareness and sensitivity to the environment and environmental challenges. And, you know, again, it says environmental challenges. So you might be thinking, okay, this is about climate change, or this is about solid waste or garbage pollution, but it could be any challenges around us, developing an awareness. It could be, how are we going to address purchasing food for the family when we only have X amount of money, right? So now, since this education is about everything around us, it could easily be more of a social science issue to do with nutrition and to do with mathematics and how much money is needed. Knowledge and understanding of the environment and environmental challenges, attitudes of concern for the environment, motivation to improve or maintain environmental quality, and the skills to identify and help resolve environmental challenges, and part in activities that lead to the resolution of environmental challenges. Environmental education does not advocate a particular viewpoint or course of action, that rather it aims to teach individuals how to weigh various sides of an issue through critical thinking, and it enhances their own problem solving and decision-making skills. And I believe that is what we are really needing today. So just to make a distinction, it's not so much just about knowledge and providing information about the environment. It's not just about saying this is what a forest is, this is where forests are found, but rather these are the issues that are impacting our environment and therefore us. So environmental education, different from environmental information, the latter would be providing facts or opinions about environmental issues. Environmental education should teach individuals critical thinking and enhance their problem solving and decision-making skills. and it does not advocate for a particular viewpoint or way of thinking, but encourages individuals to make their own minds up by presenting the facts in different ways, in ways that are interesting, in ways that are relevant to them and are interesting. And so let's examine that a little bit further. We, I'm sure, are aware of the needs and challenges within the education system. Our teachers have a responsibility to address the curricula that they have been given with respect to different subject areas in terms of academic knowledge. You know, at the end of this term or the end of the year, the students should have this knowledge, should be able to explain, should be able to compare, should be able to describe certain things, and should have certain skills to be able to carry out certain activities, be able to measure this, be able to carry out this particular experiment, etc. So that's one set of needs within our education system. But we also need to be developing the emotional and other life skills. And we know that parents have a great responsibility, but unfortunately, our reality is that there's a struggle there within ours. And we need to find ways, and maybe in some of the things I'm going to share later on, these are ways to involve our parents in activities without just sending the children home with projects to do at home, you know, build a model of a heart or build a model of a balance beam or measuring tool or something like that, but perhaps things that they can do actively, practically at the school. So those are the skills that will be teaching us how to work together as teams, how to have and exercise discipline, and as I said before, the observational, analytical, and reporting skills. We know also that we have a number of challenges. I touched on them already. We have all these community and societal influences, crime and violence, sexualization of children, an approach which says, you know, oh, this education thing, you don't need that to make money anymore. You can just be on TikTok or whatever the latest social media and become famous and be earning money just by showing your face or other body parts. So, you know, there's this strong drive for popularity, and social media now is so accessible. Back in the day, you knew what time TV signed on at a particular time, and there was a greater level of ability to control what children were exposed to. And nowadays with social media, it seems that what is seen on social media seems more real to the children than what is actually real. So we have challenges in our education system, and I do believe that the environmental education approach is one that can be used not only to provide the academic knowledge and skills, but also to work on the emotional and other life skills. So here I'm trying to just depict for you that we may need to make this effort to move from here to make the things we're teaching pop and be exciting and enlightening. And this photograph in the background and also in the foreground, an environmental education tour that the JCDT, the organization that I work with, organizes, schools call us and make their appointments to take children of all different ages, whether primary, secondary. We also have tertiary groups who come and they do this educational tour, and I'll share more about it. And I was really struck by this little boy noticing these two parts of fern plants and putting them together to make a heart. And I think it's really very telling. Okay, so Jamaica does have several examples of best practices in environmental education pedagogy, including manuals prepared and tested under the Jamaica Environment Trust Schools Environment Program. I don't think the program is running anymore due to financial challenges, but there were efforts to have the Ministry of Education integrate the manuals and the information and the approaches into the school environment, the school system. And you don't have to develop invent the wheel from scratch. I think teachers have enough to do with their planning and so on. But the point is that there are a lot of resources. And this particular one, which you can find on the Jamaica Environment Trust website, which I have up there for you, www.jamentrust.org, you'll find their SEP or Schools Environment Program Manual, and it provides a wide range of Jamaican appropriate material, curriculum appropriate material for you to use. In addition, of course, there is material available through a variety of recognized institutions from all around the world. And just as social media is at the touch of a button for our students, it's at the touch of a button also for teachers. So there is a vast amount of material that can be used to provide the content that is needed, as well as to find new and exciting ways to carry out the activities, the learning activities, to make things interesting for our students. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but there are also numerous opportunities for educational field trips and activities and experiments at school. Environmental education is related to every subject in the curriculum and has the potential to make subjects so much more relevant and interesting to students. And that's what we have to do, because the students are distracted by social media, and worse with COVID and being at home, they're used to seeing their environment portrayed through the electronic media, and that seems, as I said before, more real than reality itself. Okay, so as I was saying, I gave the example of Hollywell. Don't know how many of you have been, perhaps just for relaxation, but we have an excellent environmental education tour. It provides an experience walking through the forest, and also a number of other things. I won't go into that. I have a few photographs, but there are many other organizations. I have written down a few here, but I will just add some others. The Institute of Jamaica would be another one. The Hope Gardens and Hope Zoo also have activities that you can do, and also the school grounds. So in the past, sometimes we would have, activities outside the schoolroom, and I'm sure even if your school campus has a lot of concrete and dirt, there are areas you can find to be outside and doing activities in the schoolyard. And coming up with new things to do. We heard Ambassador Blake talking about the school garden and growing things. So environmental education is related to every subject in the curriculum and has the potential to make subjects so much more relevant and interesting to students. And of course, we have been hearing about climate change. It is one of the environmental issues that's very important to us, to the world, because it is impacting not simply our way of life, but our own survival. So we have to interest our children. And one of the ways that I've seen, and now I'm going through some photos to share with you some of the experience at Hollywell in the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park. And this will also give you an idea of some of the things that can be done in areas you can visit. I shared some of them with you, the Port Royal Marine Lab, even visits to Hope Gardens, Hope Zoo, etc. So, you know, the children are walking through the forest and observing small details, and it's very quiet. Sometimes we stop and ask them just to be quiet and just listen to the sounds. They'll be going under and over. So they're also exercising. They are using all their senses of sight and hearing and touch, listening, and observing small items, holding small creatures, perhaps like this is a freshwater crab on the right. Don't know how many people know anymore what this fruit or pods are on the left. It's annatto. And these are a little bit dried out, but you can imagine what could be done with the ripe pods, and how that could be become a whole class about so many things about the Taino. It could become an art class. It could be a biology class. It could be maths, could be included. How many seeds are in that pod? At Hollywell, there are also signs and information that you can read, particularly say for the older students. This particular set of signs addresses the issue of climate change and what can be done, whether it is planting trees, using alternative energies such as solar power, and you would be able to show the children the solar panels on the roofs, etc., of the building. Inside our Discovery Center, you get a little taste of the history of Jamaica, specific to the Blue and John Crow Mountains. There are artifacts and other interesting things. And I know that the same goes for many sites, many places that students can visit. And if you have the time, these are Boy Scouts, and I'm sure that the girls do similar activities. So they're camping. So a night outside would be a great experience. And what do they do? It's one day of activity out in the field, but they're going to take that back and use it in arts, the visual arts. These two murals here were created by University of Technology students after they came up to Hollywell on their community service, did the educational guided trail tour, and then created murals which we're using at the site about Nani and the Maroons, so the cultural as well as the natural heritage. They may take photographs, do drawings using different materials or different artwork, maybe from found items, dried leaves and other things that they could take with them, writing essays and poems. Counting, now these are some of our rangers, but they need the skills to count, because when we're planting our reforestation and forest restoration activities, we need to know how many of this plant versus how many of that plant. They need to be able to measure the trees that we're growing. And these are activities that you can be doing at school as well. This is just out in my backyard. There's tomato plants on one fence. There's cerce. So just simple things. It doesn't have to be things that are going to cost a lot of money. But with that, the students can learn teamwork. In this case, this group of students from Moortown primary and junior secondary school developed a poem that they were sharing, a whole performance routine, in fact. And just doing that really was teaching them about heritage, about cultural and natural heritage, and working together and sharing the different components of the presentation. So I said I would try to remember to say, just do it. We can't allow ourselves to become frustrated and depressed. Everything is not perfect. Yes, the curricula is huge. There's a lot to cover, but I believe that there are ways to approach things in a much more practical way. And I hope I've shared some good examples of how you could do it in terms of where to get the information from, including Jamaican information, jamentrust.org for their schools environment manuals, visiting different sites far and wide, as well as doing activities within the schoolyard, and particularly at the primary level, cross-cutting across the different subject areas. What we need to be doing is ensuring that the children are being asked questions. So whether it's in the poem that they're writing or the essay that they are writing, for any subject area, questions such as where does water come from? And that's one of the things that we talk about in our field trips, trail tours at Hollywell. And seeing streams, and from Hollywell you can actually look down and see the Mona Reservoir. And what if there is less rain? What happens when there is drought? What happens if trees are cut? How do the trees influence our rainfall? And these kind of what if questions are important for us to learn critical thinking. If this happens, then that is the consequence. And then the problem solving, well, what can we do about it? Don't we need to cut trees? What do we use trees for? How can we develop new ideas? What happens if temperature increases? What can we help? What can help us to keep cooler? In terms of hurricane preparation, for example, it's something we're all going to touch on next year again in June, but of course, hurricane season continues through to November. I notice nowadays we seem to think that hurricane preparation is rushing out to the supermarket and the groceries and purchasing as much tin food or crackers and bulo as possible. And really, that's just one small aspect. What about the clearing of drains? What about keeping trees pruned? What about maintaining our forests? So there's a lot of questions that can be asked for the children to consider. And I hope that this has motivated you to see how you can incorporate environmental education approaches into the education that you're doing with your students at all levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Otuokon. Your presentation has been enlightening. And it is one I believe that we can take a lot from, especially those who practice education and actually engage in the process of teaching and learning. You know, I really agree with much of what you've said, you know, even the point you made that we have now, you know, what really is happening present is that we are steeped in the content. The curricula is driven more by the content. And there is need to bring that real life experience and to do that integration so that the engagement can be a much more rewarding one, and one whereby our students, when they would have left us, would be able now to carry out things in a way that will help our environment and to make living and life much more better. So thank you very much for that, Doc. And at this time, I must say that we are going to be engaging in a Q&A. We have Ambassador Byron Blake and we have Dr. Susan Otuokon. They're here and we all sat, we all listened, and I'm going to ask at this time for the posing of questions, and our presenters will be willing and ready to share. So I'm going to ask those persons who are in the background and is able to see the questions to just make me aware as to when they come in. Mrs. Alvaranga, could you assist me, please?
Certainly. We're going to invite persons to type their questions and we will respond as best we can. Okay, the first question is, what strategies youth can use to get the government's attention on environmental issues? And that comes from Kimara Elliott.
Well,
Any of the presenters?
There is actually, I think it's called the Youth Environmental Education Environmental Advocacy Network. So, and there's also a youth group that has been organized specifically. I'll try to look up those for you, but I bet that I know both of them have their social media posts. And so if you just look up for Jamaica Youth Environmental Advocacy or Youth Climate Change, you'll probably see them popping up. So youth have been forming groups and responding, you know, participating in panel discussions, writing letters to the various ministries or different agencies, participating in environmental education and advocacy, as well as doing activities within their own communities and with different organizations. Because I want to see where youth are not, as I had said before, just getting frustrated and feeling that they can't do anything, but at the same time writing the letters and perhaps calling on radio programs isn't enough. You want to be doing and participating in the various activities. And you'll see, we think we just recently had International Coastal Cleanup Day. So there are many, many opportunities. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. See what's happening out there and see how you can, get your group together to participate.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, and using the idea of a group, especially your local groups of youth, observe what is happening and utilize those activities whether by photographs or in essays or so, and make those available in the public space. You know, for example, it seems to me, and I have not seen too many of these, but if you take in the Blue Mountain area, or you take in the cockpit country, I have not seen too many of the youth groups in those areas coming out. I hear the old people say things when something up. But if your youth were to organize themselves systematically there and can make observations and bring up those observations for discussions, it will also be useful to encourage them to take pictures of situations when they go to different places. For example, I'm certain that one or two of our youth will go to, like say, the Cayman Islands. And I always ask people who go to the Cayman Islands whether they ever visit the area called Hell. You know, it's a rock, or the black rock area. And if you take pictures of areas like that, and then you realize that the vegetation in that area was like the vegetation you have in the cockpit country, soil type and so forth. You know, you begin to cut down those trees in the cockpit area. Sooner or later, that is what you're going to have. So I'm just saying, if they're organized into clubs and groups and are able to systematically get into the habit of taking photographs and so, and make those available. Could be people dumping, you know, and make those available.
And if
Thanks
I could
very much.
suggest another activity would be interviewing older people in your community, because I think one of the challenges is that a lot of our youth are seeing our environment as it is now and don't have that memory of what it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so we're kind of used to garbage being around us. We're used to having less trees. We're used to having, you know, everywhere paved with concrete and asphalt. So many of our youth don't remember what things used to be like. In some of the communities I work with in the Blue Mountains, a lot of the farmers now want more irrigation pipes and this sort of thing. And when you ask them, and it's very costly. And also when they put them in, people cut them and take them to move somewhere else. So there's a challenge there. But when you ask the older people why they didn't need irrigation in the past, it's because there was not just more rainfall, but there was more dew. So the air was just cooler and damper. They didn't actually need it. But the younger people would not have had that experience. And so they wouldn't have seen the changes that have been happening.
Okay.
Okay, for the presenters, there are 2 more questions posed. One may have been partially answered. This says, great presentation from both panelists. The curriculum already has much of what you have both presented so how can teachers better sequence the curriculum experiences to emphasize more of the non-content specific skills you mentioned?
Okay,
I think
if I start,
okay, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
I think in both our presentations, we mentioned the question of orientation and awareness, not so much the information, not so much the information. And the reason for that is that sometimes one of the brightest one was the more information we have, and we do the greatest foolishness. The engineer, one of the first leading engineers in Jamaica on conservation, was from not Oturis, from beyond Oturis. He conservation and did the energy audits and everything else. And when Gilbert took his roof, he said to me, Byron, I am a fool. I'm an engineer. I saw people that were doing the construction. I saw them put the steel. I saw them bend the steel. And I saw that they did not tie the steel. But I didn't say anything. So when Mr. Gilbert came and blew and lifted the roof and the steel straightened up, his roof went. So he had the information, he had the knowledge, but the awareness in the moment, and the constant thinking about things is what you have missed. So what you need is really that, how to use the information, how to think about it, how to integrate the knowledge which they have. One of the points I made, which was like integrating your knowledge. Now, we have people who are specialists, so when they're thinking about this, they think about that, and then next time they think about something else, and they're totally different. Integration of the information, teach them to integrate that information. So not more information, but how to use it and how to be aware that all the information they have is theirs, and to bring that together on any problem.
And I think just to add in terms of, I think we get caught up with the content and not realizing that just some activities, being out in nature, under the trees. I see Mr. Hushim here, so from Montego Marine Park Trust, as they are being out at sea or on the beach, just being out in nature, which doesn't happen so much anymore. Just that as an activity in and of its own, feeling the sun on your face, sticking your hand out and feeling the rain, those things are important for children. Looking at the flowers, how many drawing it to see how many petals and so on. This sort of observation is developing a sensitivity, and the whole working together in the team, collecting things, for example. That's not really content driven, but it is creating the sensitivity and awareness that we want to create. So those are some of the activities, as well as asking certain questions that you have the children thinking about.
The final question is, how adherent are we as a country to the use of environmental impact assessments prior to and not after a development project has started?
I could share something on that, which is that most environmental impact assessments are for large development. That's the first thing. So for a lot of the smaller, and I'm going to say construction, because sometimes we talk about development, and I think Ambassador Blake mentioned this. So for a lot of, if I am doing something on my property, small property, expanding, building on one room or something, I wouldn't be required to do an environmental impact assessment. If there is an activity, say building a new gas station, I might not be required to do an environmental impact assessment, because there have been hundreds and hundreds of gas stations built. We know what the standards are. There's information the engineers have, the architect, etc., what to put where, what not to do, what are the requirements. So we do, there is that as one issue. And then the other thing, that part of an environmental impact assessment is how to mitigate against the potential environmental harm and destruction that might be caused. However, we have a challenge where it comes to ensuring that the persons carrying out these activities actually they might agree, they have a document, their assessment says that these are the recommendations and this is how they will mitigate against environmental impact. However, they might not actually carry out the activities because we do have an issue with monitoring. The government does not necessarily have enough personnel, and this is where civil society is important to keep tabs on what you're seeing around you and reporting to the relevant agencies, because oftentimes they don't have the staff to be monitoring some of the mitigation activities.
Let me also add a couple of points on this. One, why is the impact assessment done and who pays for it? Is the impact assessment really done to show what is the likely consequence, or is it done to justify the activity? And I want to suggest that in a lot of the cases where we see so-called impact EIAs, that they are done by consultants to justify the activity. I saw some assessments around some projects in St. Anne, for example, and presentation by what do I know very well. And when you see those presentations are done to justify the activity. And because the person who do the assessment have reputation, poor people around, they're not questioned. So that's one of the first things. And therefore, who pays for it? The second thing, and I think my colleague had just made reference to it, we are great for doing things. We do it, and we say it's out there, and nobody ever looks back at it and say, no, it's been followed. It's been followed 5 years down the road. So we do it, we satisfy the legal requirements. Sometimes we don't even satisfy the legal requirements. I said capacity to assess, the involvement of communities in assessments, and really the honest technical work on the part of agencies is critical to it. So we tend to go through the motions where it's necessary. And my colleague was also saying where it's not, doesn't seem to be necessary because the activity seems to be small. But 10 smalls could make a reasonable size. And depending on where it is, it could have a significant impact. If it's on the bank of the river, you have 10 houses, big houses, but each day, all the sewage and all the wash water and everything is going to the river. Sooner or later, even though it's 10 small houses, they'll make a difference. But you see, they were not a part of an assessed settlement, so each one went up. I was not judged. So I think that we have to be careful that the assessments are not used to satisfy legal and international requirements up front, and then are forgotten. And worse, that they are not used to hoodwink communities into believing that the thing will have no impact. I shudder, for example, every time I hear discussion about country and so. And since I'm not going to want to come back in immediately, so could I just could I say that we also say things that we talk, and then we say, how does that come back? For example, we say we are going to plant 3 million trees over a period of time. All right. So assuming we achieve that 3 million trees planted, would we have added to Jamaica's net tree stock? We have added to the net tree stock.
Not necessarily, because maybe we cut down 6 million otherwise.
Besides
That's
that,
true.
nobody is counting what we are cutting down. And secondly, nobody is saying, but when I plant a young tree now, it is not the same thing as cutting down a 200-year-old tree. You know, so we do these things and they sound good and they look good, but nobody is looking at net impact. All right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Susan Otokun and Ambassador Byron Blake for having shared with us in this session. Quite interesting presentations, and I must say, based on the questions that were raised in this Q&A, persons have been thinking about the things you have shared. At this point in time, before we bring the curtains down on this session, I am going to be asking Professor Hutton just to share some brief words. And after, yes.
Just before Professor comes in.
Yes, sir.
Since we are all on the line, and let me raise one issue, and children are very important here. In Jamaica's case, our water is a critical resource. We have the good quality water now, but it is a critical resource, and we have to protect our water sources. And we should reach a stage where there is not a debate about how you protect the water sources. The first line, it should be, you're going to protect it, and then you see whether you can do it. Not the other way around, not see if you can impact it, and then see how you're going to protect it, because you can't reverse these things. So I just wanted to put, and that's important especially for children, the question of our water and our major water sources, and we have 2 of those in Jamaica. We have to make sure that we teach our children about those water sources and how to protect them, and especially children who live in those areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Byron Blake. So at this time, I'm going to ask Professor Clinton Hutton to share brief words before we bring the curtains down on this session. Professor Hutton.
Professor Hutton, can you unmute your mic and your video? Thank you.
Not sure if he's having a challenge doing so. I think he might be able to make those statements in one of the other sessions. So one and all, I want to take this opportunity in thanking you for sharing in this session. The session is hosted by the Mico University College, and we are discussing climate change, environmental education. So thanks again, and you have a good day.
So we ask participants to stay with us for session 2.
When does session 2 start?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to the 3rd annual Mico Conference, which is focused this year on climate change and education. The second segment will be focused on innovations and other innovative approaches to environmental education. For this, we'll have two environmental scientists who will be making presentations. My name is Yvonne Jones Nelson, and I'll be taking you through this segment of the conference. Coming out of the United Nations Climate Change Conference COP26 last year, the delegates agreed that teaching climate change issues and the introduction of environmental education in the curricula at all levels of the education system and across subject areas to be a key part of climate strategies. That is, if we wish our children to become good environmental ambassadors. In terms of our presentation to this segment, first we'll have environmental consultant, this is Carol Elizabeth Ross, and then Mr. Hugh Shim, Executive Director of the Montego Marine Park Trust. We're asking the questions for these two presenters to be held until the end of Mr. Shim's presentation. Our first presenter will be environmental consultant, Mrs. Carol Elizabeth Ross, following the schedule that we have. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in zoology, specializing in marine biology, and a Master's of Philosophy in zoology, specializing in ethnology, both degrees from the University of the West Indies. She has a diploma in sampling and data analysis from the Ministry of Environment, Ottawa, Canada, and a diploma in financial management and small business management from the Jamaica Institute of Management. She also holds a diploma in teaching from Church Teachers College. Ms. Ross has served over 13 years with the Natural Resources Conservation Department, now NEPA, where she held several positions. As acting director for the Aquatic Resources Division, she was responsible for the coordination and management of wetlands, water quality, oceanography, and ecology branches, which she managed. She prepared and designed projects, studies, and resource management and implemented guidelines for these subject areas. She assisted in the evaluation of private and public sector investment development proposals for the exploitation of ecologically sensitive marine and coastal coastal and territorial resources. She assisted Mrs. Diana McIntyre Pipe in promoting alternative tourism in the South Central region through the Central and South Tourism Committee. She's an environmental consultant with various organizations. Mrs. Ross was part of the scientific team which conducted numerous field investigations and prepared environmental impact studies for private sector and government organizations. She was also involved in the monitoring of the environmental impact of several World Bank funded projects in Jamaica. Mrs. Ross retired from public service in 2011 and was employed on a part-time basis and is presently employed on a part-time basis at the All-American Institute of Medical Science in Black River, St. Elizabeth, where she taught environmental science to the pre-med students. She's currently an external examiner for the Council of Community Colleges in Jamaica. Mrs. Ross has 3 children. She'll be making the presentation this afternoon on environmental education in Jamaica and the use of environmental science activity kits to provide activities that can enhance classroom learning experiences. Mrs. Ross, we now invite your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sure what is happening.
Please go ahead, Ms. Ross. You're hearing it clearly.
Oh, okay. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Let me just say that this conference gives me the opportunity to present this initiative of mine and to get some feedback on it from educators. And so I thank the organizers for hosting it, planning and hosting this conference. Could Ms. Alvarenga assist me by putting up the first slide, please? First one. Which shows all the, yes, okay. This first slide shows pictures of the covers of activity kits on 4 specific environmental topics I developed during the past 18 months. It's an attempt to enhance children's awareness and understanding at the primary level about Jamaica's unique environment. I thought of this because of 2 reasons. My experience as a field biologist with the Natural Resources Conservation Department, now NEPA, in the early years of my professional career, and 2, as a lecturer in environmental studies at Knox Community College, and even more recently as an external examiner for the Council of Community Colleges. I just want to say something about how I developed as an environmental educator against the background of environmental management in Jamaica. Because back in the 70s, when I graduated, environmental education was not in vogue. We didn't know anything about it. So just let me say briefly then, as was mentioned before, the first environmental conference was held in Sweden in 1972. Jamaica was represented at that conference, and this resulted in the formation of the NRCD in 1974. This is the lead agency in Jamaica with the mandate for environmental management and conservation. Although there were some environmental agencies, so to speak, before NRCD's formation, for example, the Beach Control Authority, but this agency had more to do with the licensing of lifeguards for public beaches than with actual environmental management of our beaches. Water quality monitoring was done by some other agency in some other ministry, and so on. So the formation of NRCD then allowed for all these agencies to be centralized for better and more effective environmental management. I was in the unique position of being employed as a field biologist to that agency soon after my graduation from UWI. I was able to observe firsthand the early degradation of some of our more fragile ecosystems, such as the Black River Upper Morass. And at that time, many of our wetlands were being drained and filled either for agriculture and or housing developments. Rice was a big thing then, and so our wetlands were specifically targeted for rice production. And you know, I remember to this day, I actually did a field trip with Mr. George Proctor, who was the then senior botanist at the Institute of Jamaica. And I just remember his frustration tinged with sadness when we looked at an endemic species, Grias. The common name is anchovy pear. They were all felled and lying on the ground. And he was so frustrated and sad, not just because of the loss to science, but for the fact that the loss of a possible economic opportunity for Jamaica, because he said that this species had a nut which was of very high quality, comparable to the Brazilian nut. And had he known beforehand, you know, he could have recommended to government that we develop orchards of it. So over time then, environmental education was eventually added to the science curriculum at the primary and secondary levels. And it's nice to know that even now there is an actual subject of environmental science being offered at the Cape level. And many of the community colleges are now offering associate and bachelor's degrees in environmental studies. But notwithstanding the addition of environmental concepts at the primary level, my experience as a teacher at Knox taught me that many of our students had little or no understanding of environmental concepts, let alone our diverse ecosystems. Let me say here though, and I want to make it clear, that Knox is a rural institution in the central hills of the island. And many students come from our surrounding rural areas, mainly from the parishes of Clarendon, St. Elizabeth, and southern St. Anne. So we don't get students, we don't typically get students who with the eight ones and twos. And so, you know, some of them come in without any knowledge of the environment at all, or even want to know about the environment, because they really came in to do other programs, but didn't meet all the criteria. So they sort of sidetracked into the environment. Dr. Otuokon made mention about the fact that it has become a checklist, and I can vouch for that too. I also found at Knox that students will study a particular subject, but they never use the information garnered in that subject to answer a response from another subject. So if you teach, for example, about the main impacts on mangrove swamps, they would never think of using it as an example to answer a response in environmental management. So there is a breakdown. We're not making the connection at all. And, you know, I used to do a field trip with the students to YS Falls, and their assignment really was to evaluate that attraction as an ecotourism attraction, given criteria. And I was always amazed at how the students enjoyed that day. every time I did it, the students enjoyed the day. And it wasn't just fun for them. They did their assignment and they were able to evaluate it, but they had a wonderful time doing it. And one year, a student actually came to me after that day and said, Mrs. Ross, now I really understand what you meant when you said the type of feelings you get when you get into water-based activities. And it was one of the little rewards, I think, of teaching. So my objective then in developing these environmental science activity kits is to provide activities that can enhance classroom learning experiences. They are intended to enable students to understand and appreciate their natural environment, as well as to teach strategies to mitigate or solve environmental problems. Development and its associated impacts is a feature of our modern world, but we can learn how to work with nature as opposed to working against it. It is hoped that as students grow in their understanding of it, they will own it as part of their heritage and want to protect it. And again, Dr. Otuokan mentioned developing empathy and emotional skills. These kits would, I am hoping, add to the variety of activities that are available. They are specific to the Jamaica's environment and include background content on a number of our ecosystems and topics, a variety of activities, as well as questions for classroom research and discussion based on the science curriculum at the primary level. Again, I was horrified to see the level of content in that curriculum. Some of those things I learned at the tertiary level. So I am not sure how teachers are getting through some of it, or even if some of our primary school teachers have the background knowledge. But again, I'm hoping that these kits will help. And many of the activities are designed for the classroom experience. Some can also be further enhanced by field trips. And I'd just like to say that I was guided by an experienced science teacher at the primary level in the wording of some of the questions. So let's go into a little more detail now about these activity kits. Could you put up the second slide, please? Okay, so the first one is I did something on the Black River Lower Morass. It's an area I know pretty well. I actually worked in it when we looked at the fuel crisis in the 70s and the possibility of using peat for fuel. And I made sure to use pictures wherever possible about these actual ecosystems. Next slide, please. So this is an example. Just let me say that I can't, of course, the time wouldn't permit to go through every single activity, but I just use some examples from each kit to give you an idea of what it's all about. So this slide here, it's about grouping or deciding what eats what in the Black River Lower Morass. Of course, there is a background blurb about a bit about the morass, again using language that's used in the curriculum, and the very important fact that it is now a Ramsar site. I don't know how many Jamaican children even know what a Ramsar site is. So you get a background content, and then you get activities associated and related to that background content. So this particular activity is students must draw lines to what the organisms on the left eat. And again, I used, wherever possible, I use actual pictures from the Black River Lower Morass. So I didn't just come up with a fish diagram. I came up with snook and so on. Next slide, please. Coral reefs. Again, for this kit, this clearly would not be enhanced by a field trip. I could never advise anybody to take young children to snorkel on our coral reefs. So one of the activities I put forward in this kit is for them to actually do a model of a coral reef. And this should be a class activity, not something to take home. It would be a class activity. And again, I tried to use, with very rural schools in mind, I tried to use resources that are easily available. So I give alternatives where possible. For example, a fish aquarium would be the ideal piece of equipment to use here, but some schools may not have a fish aquarium. So a carton box can do with one side removed. And next slide, please. So this gives you coral reef construction, for example, and it lists all the items that you would need, and it also suggests some classroom research before students get into this, and this research would of course be guided by the teacher. Next slide. Okay, this just goes into a little more detail of what the teacher would have to do to get ready for this activity and safety considerations and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, now we go on to Helsha Hills. And this is a dry limestone forest habitat. And I used the iguana as the main feature of my little background blurb. And there is a story around it because many years ago, people thought that it had become extinct until one specimen was found by a local farmer, and he actually carried it to the Hope Zoo, and that started the whole Head Start program at the Hope Zoo to breed them in captivity. And the title, it's on the second page, which I don't have this slide, but the title, I actually used Jamaica's Jurassic moment, because it was an actual phrase used by Mr. Milton Ryback, the then curator of Hope Zoo, and in speaking about the program years ago. And the teacher that helped me with the questions, she thought that phrase would spark interest in young students, especially boys, she said. Okay, the final activity kit is about our fossils. So it's a brief introduction to geology in an attempt to teach young students about fossils and their formation. And the main activity in this kit is, of course, mimicking their formation with the use of small action figures, dyes, glue, small containers like matchstick boxes, and so on. When I was a child, I thought fossils were about dinosaur bones, and I'm sure a lot of students still think that way. So this gives them a very brief background into our fossils. And again, I use pictures of our own fossils here in Jamaica, but it's not yet complete. So at this point, I only have the cover page. That's about it. It's pretty short because I only completed 4 topics, and I really just wanted to get a feedback, present them to get some kind of feedback as to by educators to see if they would really take off in our schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you also, Mrs. Ross, for your presentation. I like the idea that you're getting students more involved through field work. The hands-on experience is extremely important, the learning process. At the end, we'll have the question and answer session, so we can get more feedback on this.
Yes, yes.
Relates to your kits, so it relates to dry limestone forest habitats, Black River, coral reefs, and fossils, no?
Yes,
because you have dwelt on some interesting areas here that students generally don't really focus on, but are also very, very important in terms of evaluating the environment. I like your hands-on approach. Right? Okay, thank you very much again. Ms. Ross.
Thank you too.
Our second presenter is Mr. Lucian. He's the executive director of the Montego Marine Park Trust. His role as caretaker of the Montego Marine Park includes actions such as enforcement of marine regulations, environmental programs, and scientific research. The objective of the Montego Bay Marine Park is based on the understanding that the environmental programs should foster environmentally friendly lifestyles. Mr. Yushim was born in Montego Bay. He has a Bachelor's of Arts in Philosophy and a Master's of Science in Education from the University of Southern Maine, USA. As a student at that university, he was involved in soccer and even coached the women's football, the women's field hockey team, and became a member of the Phi Nu Delta fraternity. Soon after graduation from the University of Southern Maine, he returned to Jamaica and spent 6 years at the Sam Sharp Teachers College as a lecturer in guidance counseling. It is noteworthy that he was also instrumental in forming the youth club while he was there on a marching band at that institution. Between 2004 and 2010, he worked at the Jamaica Tourist Board and the Tourism Product Development Company, TPD, where he eventually headed the tourism training unit. A major achievement was the development of the Team Jamaica program, and various community tourism training programs. As an educator, Mr. Shim also taught tourism management courses at the University of the West Indies, Montego Bay campus. He has also guest lectured psychology courses at the University of Technology, Montego Bay campus. Mr. Shim is also an honorary fellow of the Montego Bay Community College. In 2010, he was involved in organizing Jamaica Drums for Peace events. In 2013, Mr. Shim joined the Montego Bay Marine Park Trust, where he is currently engaged in the care and protection of the Montego Bay Park, Marine Park, and the implementation of environmental science and education projects, such as those related to Save Our Seas, SOS, Reef Guardians, summer camp internship, and user surveys to track economic valuation of the marine resources through the daily activities within the park. The Montego Bay Marine Park Trust this year celebrates its 30th anniversary. Mr. Shim's presentation will be on the creative learning styles used in environmental science education. Mr. Shim, we now invite your presentation.
Yeah, and it's on the camera. Yeah, hello. Yeah,
We're hearing you clearly. We're hearing you clearly, Mr. Shim.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction. I put those references in there just to kind of give an idea where I'm coming from in terms of education and experience in community development and so forth, because all those tourism related activities in terms of development, ecotourism and so forth, were all related to the environment, the saving of it and the use of it for economic benefit, because that is really a lot of the driving force behind decision making in terms of protecting the environment. You know, how can we benefit? How does it help our lifestyle and so forth? But anyway, I'll start off with we share the screen. The screen. You're seeing the beautiful pictures of the Montego Bay Marine Park right now?
Yes, we're seeing it very clearly.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so this picture on your left is really one section of the Montego Bay Marine Park, which is the Airport Point Fisheries, Special Fisheries Conservation Area. And this is this Doctor's Cave going up to the airport. So that's one section. And the other section over here is the Bogue Lagoons, which is the first area that was declared as a sanctuary. And that's over 30 years ago as well. But suffice to say that part of our job here is to protect all that there is in there, whether hopefully from pollution, natural, well, runoffs, which is man-made, we stop saying natural now, and from overfishing and misuse. One of the things to note also is that the park is in a high traffic area for tourism activities, meaning every kind of water sports that you can think of takes place. So it's not that we have a pristine area that we got to protect. We have to protect something that is always under use. So anyway, one of the things that we do, as you mentioned, is the educational components, where students come to us, we go to them, and we do take them on glass bottom boat tours. So that's a field trip where they can see coral. But I will just continue with the presentation. Yes, so like most people have been saying, and I'm glad we're all on the same page, Dr. Talk and everybody has said it, Ms. Ross, that it's just to state that I agree. It should foster environmentally friendly lifestyles. In other words, our role is not just to give information. Our role is to create lifestyles. That's how you must live every day. And when you as the student or even our present tertiary students, decision makers, if you don't have that attitude towards saving and caring the environment, then all that information will be pretty much useless. So we try to promote a culture of living in harmony with the environment. And I think that has been said so many times that I don't really have to get into it. So our approach is to try to create ambassadors. And because of my background in tourism, and tourism is all about marketing, right? We at the Marine Park, we adopted a marketing approach to how we deal with education and trying to reach the public through public awareness campaigns and so forth. So first of all, we don't start with the assumption that you must learn and we're going to give you all of this information that you must absorb and regurgitate, because we're really not an educational institution, but we are doing education. So we try to use the catchy approach, which is the marketing approach, to create ambassadors. And the way we do this is, yes, we would love to use all of those AVs and the things that are on the internet and the manuals and so forth. We do use them, but we try to catch the attention of our audience by using audiovisual communication and experiential learning. You know, everybody spoke about field trips and so forth. So hold on. So the ambassadors, the picture here on your right, well, my right, was a program that I think the Australian aid people gave us called the Reef Guardians. So we actually had t-shirts and manuals and what practical exercises and so forth. So that's what I mean by creating ambassadors. You do have programs that come with all the trappings of marketing and promotion. We try to engage persons as much as we can. So we have, for example, we take them on tours. So it's not just glass bottom boat tours. We can show them the importance of what a healthy marine environment, marine park does for the economy, because of course the cruise ship is in the background. But we do have the cruise port right in the marine park as well. We do water sampling. We assist NEPA and DB Discovery Bay with water sampling as well. And we do have field trips for interns where we actually go to mangrove sites and look at seedlings, look how they grow, and look what's affecting the mangrove. Sorry. So we try to get the message across, and we do have the usual cleanup, but we also have underwater cleanup. And here I have a clip of one of the poems that we had developed and put to a little bit of music. Very amateurish, because of course it's not a big budget, because when you're getting into promotion and production, it can get expensive. So all of this is homemade.
Have a backbone sound just now. Is it a part of the presentation, Mr.?
Yes. Were you hearing it?
Yes, we heard that something playing.
Oh, it wasn't clear. Okay, but basically just a sample of one of the songs that we made using volunteers and doing it homemade. about pollution and recycling and what you should do and so forth. Right? Okay. So we also created a comic which we animated and put it on YouTube and on our website as well. And we have a project that we're pursuing with partners now to do an underwater sculpture park in the marine park itself, which would accumulate and we could study how corals grow and what marine animals would be attracted and so forth. So it's part of the ecosystem, but we would also be an attraction. And that's one of the things that we would hope to use to attract people to come to the park and to learn more about the environment and corals and so forth. So I'm going to try another clip again. If it's not working, you just let me know.
You know the risk, but we saw something terrible we have to warn you about.
It must be twice the size of America, if not bigger.
Are you sure this sounds rather familiar? Aliens, as I found in the past, were the direct effect of years of human activity. Activities that now threaten to blow the whole earth. Where the humans see paradise, a playground for party and recreation, for young adventurers who think much more different, dirty, polluted, and tainted view of what should be paradise. Something needed to be done. Hearing for our world, for this and the next generation. The adventures of aliens highlight on.
Is it ready? Mine first faster. Okay. So basically what we try to do is to use that just to capture attention and imagination. Because as you know, with social media and the amount of stimulation that's on the tablets and so forth, we would hope that the children, especially at those ages, would at least get interested. You notice also, I mean, this was done in 2016, that we had chosen mermaids. I know we have river mammals, but I mean, mermaids, they can be used as anything. And now you notice that Disney has even redone their mermaid idea. So the whole idea of mermaids and Frozen and the Ice Queen and all of those kind of things, we want to get into that kind of space. And that's why I mentioned that it's almost like a marketing campaign. We also have other programs. Some of you might know that the lionfish is an invasive species. It doesn't have a lot of natural predators. It reproduces very rapidly and it consumes everything. So one way international campaigns have been to reduce it by promoting the consumption, in creating demands for it. So we have also been engaged in lionfish cooking competition, for example, which you see over on the left. And we had our t-shirts that we were distributing. So eat me, please. And then we also had a Save the Parrotfish campaign. Parrotfish wanted alive, not dead, to clean the reefs and protect the environment, for example. So the campaign goes with it. And we had SOS, Save Our Seas, which we had used the mermaids to kind of get that message out. So we do, one of the things that we do to try and attract attention as well, because once we get people here, then we can always engage them with the information. And again, I know educational institutions can do their own little competitions, their own little projects by partnering with the different environmental agencies. Not really that difficult to do. The teachers love us because sometimes they just send us the questions that the students need. I mean, like a particular topic, and they come and we try to cover it as much as we can. So we do have Mermaid Encounters where we actually have costumed mermaids, of course, that would actually swim up to the boat while the children are on it and engage them. So they remember that trip and they remember seeing the seagrass and the whatever they see down there. The other thing in terms of using a marketing approach, that we use every medium and we try to network with everybody. So for example, you're at a school. It doesn't mean that you can't engage the beauty contestants. For example, the Miss Montego Bay pageant, we do have a collaboration with them. As a matter of fact, they'll soon be coming back this year, where they have a segment in there called environmental awareness. So they get a special prize for that. So they visit us, we give them a lecture, take them out, and then they choose, or we help them to choose whichever person seems to be the most environmentally aware, or they have been involved in cleanups or whatever in their schools or community. We even do drumming. Being a percussionist myself, I have a lot of friends that are drummers. So sometimes whenever we have public events, we always do a little bit of drumming. Last cleanup, we had persons coming doing poems about the environment, cleaning it up to drums and so forth. So we really don't bar any medium or any form of collaboration with anybody. So of course, experiences. We spoke about all the other presenters talking about experience. The glass bottom boat tours. We are in Montego Bay, so we have a lot of schools around Montego Bay. But we also have a lot of schools from the rural areas, the hills, because as you know, Jamaica is, you just turn inwards and you're in a mountain. So we have lots of kids that come, our children. And I remember one of them that really stands out to me is once we were out and we were showing them the seagrass beds, you know, and of course, they tell us here looks just like a lawn, actually. And he's saying, he never know that sea had bush on it. So the level of awareness, they didn't know, they think that further out you go, the deeper you get. So we have to explain to them the landscaping of the ocean bottom, that it undulates and you have different plants, animals, etc. So in other words, you get them fascinated and interested. And of course, a mermaid might swim by one of the days. We have summer camps that went away due to COVID, but this year we had interns. So we have a lot of students who come from multi-tertiary institutions and from National Youth Service that come for internship. So we engage them in all of our activities, and hopefully they will learn and become ambassadors as well. And in summary of what we do, this is our music video, because you know everybody relating to music now. Of course, you know there's a debate. I don't even know if there's a debate, and where the media has banned outrageous music talking about Mali or gangster or scamming or whatever. So you know that music is influential. As I said, I won't even debate about that. I know I grew up listening to music and still listen to music. So music and images are very important. So again, using that whole kind of marketing vibe, we did make our own music video. Yes, so again, it's just to grab attention, get people engaged. And it didn't cost us a whole lot of money, meaning in terms of high-end production team and so forth, because, and I'm saying this because Jamaicans, especially children, are multi-talented. You would be amazed at the things that they can come up with. Nowadays, you just need a phone, a decent phone, not even an iPhone, to make a video. And I know I've seen where children have been doing that and starting blogs and vlogs and TikTok and whatever. We have to take the same approach, you know, tap into the creativity of the students themselves. Let them produce it, because that most of what we have done, we got help from, I must say, from Kermac, because we had a good relationship with it. So they actually made some of these things as part of their assignment. So it could be, you know, that whole integrated approach that we spoke about. And pretty much that's it. I was just here to show, because I think a lot of the things that we all know and spoke about and emphasized were done already. So I don't want to get into the whole educational aspect. It's just to say that these things are possible through collaboration, because people are out there that want to do things, they want to help. The Kermac students even entered one film that they made about us in a film festival. So the help is there. It doesn't have to cost a lot. You just need to engage people. Okay, so that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shim. You know, these days we really have to strategize to spark student interest. And I see you have a lot of things under your belt that they want to be Marine Park to do just that, get the students involved and to make connections between with the environment. We're in the section now where we're looking to do question and answer, and I'm certain there are persons here from schools who would like to ask questions.
Before you go on though, I just like to acknowledge Dr. Tuokan, because one of the first persons that did our environmental education in the Team Jamaica program. 1 million years ago, Dr. Tuokan, if you remember, when you were in Mobi, she was one of the first, if not the first person. And I remember you made a little game that we were using as well. So some of us have been in it and in a long time, and boy, we really need to hand over the baton to some young people now. I'm getting very tired, I must tell you. And also Dr. Pinnock, I know he's not on now, but he was a student at Sam Shop when I was there. And that's why I mentioned the whole thing about the marching band and the community youth club that we used to engage, because as Dr. Tuokan said, it's all about attitude, you know, and engaging the entire person to know that they're a part of this whole deal and they have responsibility for it. That said, over to you.
Yeah, thanks again, Mr. Sim. And of course, this segment had Mrs. Elizabeth Ross and Mr. Yushim, who both basically presented some innovative strategies to get students' attention, to make students make connection with the environment as well. These are all important strategies in terms of students being aware of the environment. So now we're encouraging questions.
If I might just say something, because there's some similarities in what all three of us presented, and it was about the field trip. And it doesn't have to just be, although I think at least once for the year, each year group should go somewhere. And I believe that's part of the curriculum as well. but finding activities outdoors, as I said, because somebody was asking me about how do you develop these emotional skills and the sensitivity. It's not necessarily by teaching anything. People who study these things, the psychologists and so on, have found, and with respect to environmental education, it's just by having the children outdoors, right? So we need for our children to go down by the river. I mean, we're scared and so on of the river and the sea and the mountain. They might drop off somewhere, but they need to be outdoors. So they need to be underneath the ackee tree. You know, those days when we used to have classes outside and you're just outdoor, nature-based activities. It's not that you're teaching them anything, but both Miss Ross and Mr. Shim mentioned that what the children said, I enjoyed myself. It is for them to make that psychological connection between the beauty of nature, that they had a good time, that they were fascinated by this little animal, and they just enjoyed that experience. That sticks with them, and then later on they want to protect it. You have to love nature in order to want to take care of it.
That's what I found too. Yeah.
It's very because in fact, learning by doing as well, touching and feeling things and experiencing these things also play a very, very big role in terms of this learning process in the environment. Okay, so we'll open the floor now for questions and answers. For questions to our presenters. And I'm unable to see the persons who are making requests, so I'm asking some assistance from Mrs. Alvaranga and someone that I know to assist with if there are any questions. Oh, I think there is someone. There's a question and answer question here from Mr. McNeil about are there any proactive moves to have SBAs in design and implementation, monitor for the core sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, etc., CSET and truth levels. Certain of these persons can answer that question now, Mr. McNeil. But do you have any comments on the SBAs in terms of how your teaching kits can assist these students with these examinations? For example, Miss Elizabeth Ross had mentioned her kits. At what age level would be the most useful? We usually for the CSEC students, but if they have SBA being prepared, or Mr. Shim in terms of your fee work. Well, the fee work is similar to Mrs. Utukan's, Dr. Utukan's fee work, but she also organizes for areas as well. But how do you work with the SBA students and the persons doing exams at the fifth form level?
We do have a lot of SBA students because we have Montego Bay Community College, we have Montego Bay High, we have Herbert Morris, we have Mount Alvernia. So we have a lot of them that come with SBAs. What they usually do is come with the questions that the teachers give them or support. I don't know if some of them have to come up with their own questions, but what I find though is that being an educator of some sort, some of the questions I've seen, I've said, hold on a second, is a PhD you want to do or an SBA?
Yeah, those students are doing external exams.
Yeah.
Well, and even the school exams as well, lower school.
Yeah, some of them look very, very wide and in depth. For example, let's say compare what the Freeport area was before the development when the hotels came and so forth to now. And I'm saying if I was trying to find that information, I don't even know if I could. So that's just an example. But when they come with, it's usually studying just pollution or They might want to do water sampling, or they want to go look at the condition of the reef. Some might even want to look at the research that we have been doing with lionfish and so forth. But when they come, we try to accommodate them as best we can.
I don't have any experience with SBAs because I never taught at the secondary level. As was said before, I came into teaching late in life, but I have helped sixth form teachers. I think the sixth form biology syllabus asks for some kind of ecological project that the students have to do. And I have helped the science teacher at Knox High, actually took her to the North Coast and looked at a rocky shore. And students had to do a transit from the water to dry land. And they had to demarcate the different zones as it got from wet to dry. And they saw for themselves the species change and the adaptations for each zone as it got drier and drier, what the adaptations were, you know? So this, as opposed to the very wet zone that is always wet. So I've had that experience, but I never taught high school.
Just to say that we have had students coming up to Hollywood school groups for geography and a geography SBA. I don't remember if that's the one that they were also looking at soil, but there is, of course, opportunity for them to do transects at our site. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for teachers to work with us. As Mr. Shim said, you know, the teachers need to find who they can partner with. Yes. Because I think that sometimes when we have the which we do sometimes, and it's like they want you to do the work for them. And maybe it would be better if we could organize something with the teachers. Okay, this is the SBA, and we do it more as a group rather than these individual students coming to ask for assistance. I think it would be better as a group.
You know, many years ago, I had a beach trip with my family. And while on the beach, there were some other children playing on the beach. That particular beach has a patch reef close to shore. And the crest of the reef was just at the surface of the water. So you could actually see the crest from the beach. And I was totally horrified when one child said to the other, "What is that out there?" And the other child said, "Oh, it's just a pile of rocks in the water." And I said, no, something is wrong here. Yes. And in fact, for my activity kit, the blurb in my activity kit, I used that story to introduce the whole concept of coral reefs. Yeah.
That's the need that. So you're realizing from that little experience that they can't make the connection.
They can't make the connections, right? Yes. Yeah.
So even organizing the field tours and pointing out these things to them is also a memorable experience for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those kids that you have prepared will be very useful in terms of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
I also think we'll get some more feedback on it as well, because I'm certain we need those things in the schools in terms of guiding the students for field work. Dr. O'Keefe mentioned transit surveys. Some of these schools don't know how to do it. The teachers apparently are lacking in skills.
Some skills
in that area. And they need to get more practice in terms of doing those other things. So I believe that when they come to you, you should basically ask them about it because they have an interest in terms of it. If you can assist them with that. You understand? I'm not seeing any questions from my side. I'm not, if Alvaranga here with us still, could you indicate, please?
I'm still here. I don't see any new questions.
Any questions? I believe everything was very clear, crystal clear in terms of the presentation.
Perhaps I could make a comment.
Yes, please.
Because even again, as we do the school programs and the formal programs, but the informal association over time, getting these children just to understand and to emphasize the outdoor nature of things. When my grandchildren come to visit me, for example, I tend to do that on weekends. And I would have them outside. And you go through the grass and you go through the trees. My grandson was now 4.5. But when he was 2, I had him plant 2 plantains. He didn't know what he was doing, but he wanted to paint the dirt, so he covered everything and so forth. And every week he comes, he will go and we go and we look at it. And he'll make it up to a certain size, he'll push against it. And I said, no. And then when it got big enough, and he pushed against it, you don't have to tell him anything, and gradually. So just getting them over time to be acquainted informally. Then gradually you can do the more formal thing. But I think especially because we tend to formalize our education so early,
yes,
that the children don't have any time for the informal learning. And I think that is something that we should try to get in, and especially for those of you who teach people who are going to teach, especially at that very early stage, to have the children become much more just informally familiar with these things, be outside. Now, I know especially like in Kingston and so that, well, most places now, that becomes a very difficult activity because of the real dangers. But we still have to, as best as possible, try to get some of those informal, and over time, as they come, you do a certain level with them. If their friends come, the friends are outside with them, rather than being inside for quite a bit of the time, because normally for the week, they're really inside, especially. So that's one of the things I do when they come to me on weekends. But they gradually see these things. I had meant to have at the end of my presentation a 44-year-old mango tree, because I planted that mango tree, just planted it when my third son, when he was born. You planted and you went away. And the mango tree is now such a huge tree. In fact, I'm going to send it into for it to be included in the documentation. So when you talk to them, and you just show them the tree, and you ask them how old that tree is, and since you can actually tell them the exact age of the tree, and so they'll tell you it's not true, But just to get them informally involved and be outside as best we can at a very early stage. And let us not be too formal with the curriculum at that stage. The Micos and so who have influence on the curriculum development, and so you need to use that influence in terms of, you see as well, all of us have been saying, the specific information load, and get to the more in the early stage, them just learning things and integrating the knowledge.
Thanks. Michael,
the experience.
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yes, I'm talking to Mr. Ross. That's not, or was it Dr. Computer?
Pardon, say again.
Now, I was saying that we encourage fieldwork at Mico. Because at Mico, we really push it a lot because we want our teachers, when they leave, they know how to operate in terms of how to organize field work and how to manage it. And the importance of it as well to the students as well at all levels.
And maybe if they can even involve parents, because I know sometimes the schools might have the concern taking the children out, you know, and that responsibility, but where you can get the parents out, then you're also exposing the parents, as well as you have a few extra eyes and hands to, you know, be watching the children to help.
I think that's the schools encourage that when you're doing certain field work. But how big are the groups that come to your marine lab and apply that guidance? How big are the groups that you normally entertain in terms of
we at Hollywell, we try to have the groups not larger than 30, which is a challenge because many classrooms now it's 40 something. But we also, what we find, the schools seem to prefer to just come all on one day. So sometimes we have 3-4 bus loads of children, although we discourage that because just the amount that we can handle. That's why I said sometimes what they do is have parents, you know, even grandparents come along. But what we do then is that at this, we split the large groups into smaller groups and have different activities so that we rotate them through the activities so that each smaller group can have the kind of attention that we would want to give.
For the kids that you are dealing with, Ms. Ross, do the students and do things like lab testing?
No, I really have not got into that kind of thing. The activities really are just very, very basic, but I wanted to just make sure that it was Jamaican. So as I said before, even the organisms in the lower morass, I didn't just put a duck or a fish. I actually got pictures of the real deal so that, you know, these activities are to be guided by the teacher, you know, and the curriculum does push a lot of research.
Definitely.
Which is interesting to note, you know. So some of these activities I even suggested in the teacher preparation that they go online right in the classroom and they do some basic research. Because again, if I use the example of the Black River Lower Morass, it's one of the last known sites for the whistling duck. So these are things I think would really excite, I'm hoping would excite children, you know, so they just don't see a duck, any old duck. They can know that it is the whistling duck, and many of their nesting sites have been degraded and so on. This is what I really want to get at, the specifics of each ecosystem.
Well, that is important too. Differences between them and among them. Well, presenters, I want to keep the program longer than it's supposed to be. Thank you all for your presentations. They were very enlightening and useful. And I think these kits will be very easy for the schools, just a matter for them to know how to use it. And the organizing field work is a very important part of learning these days. And I thank you for your presentations today on this. It's an enlightening experience. And in terms of how you can utilize learning and how it can be done in terms of environmental science. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
You're welcome. And I'd just like to say, to all our listeners, including our panelists, whenever you want to do field trips, you just call me. We make special arrangements for you to make it, especially Miss Ross.
Yes.
Because we take even 4, 3, and 4-year-olds, but they usually come with their parents. Most of them, half the class would be with the parents would accompany.
Okay.
So we can talk, as they say in business. We can talk and make a special arrangement for you.
Okay.
So for your marine park trips, Ms. Session, do you have size restrictions? But I know as Dr. you can find out bus loads from there. The classes are usually 45 students.
Yeah, sometimes they want to bring the whole grade level one time.
Yes.
So what we do is try to stagger them, because normally when they come to Montego Bay, they're not just coming to us. They might be going somewhere else. So we try to stagger them. Right. Or we actually hire boats just to move them out fast. We might be taking out 50 at one time, but we have some glass bottom boats that can take 25 to 30. So if we have 3 boats, we just move them out and rotate them.
It makes sense to partnership with people like you who have the infrastructure in place. So again, like YS, it was easy because there are a lot of lifeguards around. And one criterion for ecotourism is the safety. So, they are very big on safety at YS. So you didn't have to worry, because I found teenage boys especially are fearless. They are extremely, the girls are a bit easier to manage. But the boys wanted to go into the water, they wanted to swing over the river, and the guards are there. So for 1 or 2 teachers to take that responsibility, it's a bit much. Yes. So all of that is already in place, so you just have to make the arrangements beforehand and you just go,
Actually, I'm thinking about it myself, in terms of how I can organize some of my trips to your places as well. And if the kids, I'm looking forward to see that coming on the market very soon. I'm hoping that in terms of how you do the kids, the final thing, and if you allow some testing on it, so it can be utilized by not just a lower school group, but can be utilized by the upper school group as well. In terms of them doing work on the environment. Thanks again, presenters. Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you too. Thank you too.
Before we close and before we all leave, I'm going to invite Professor Hutton to just share some brief remarks. And, we want to direct attention to the slide, to the screen, which is basically showing what tomorrow's session will look like, which we are inviting you to all attend. Professor Hutton?
Hello?
Yes, we're hearing you, sir.
Okay, I would like very much to thank the presenters, all the presenters for today with all that richness. It's absolutely rich and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. The issues relating to climate change and related to environment and environmental education and the importance of teaching to all our students from all levels, I think is extremely important. And the formally and informally, the informal side of learning, which is really should be incorporated in should not even be seen as informal. I'm relating my own experience now in my relationship with nature. The love that I have for it is because of my relationship to it. My relationship to the flora and fauna. My relationship as a boy going through the mangroves, hundreds of meters in the mangrove, alone. With all the crab and all the hatchlings and everything in that space, climbing from tree to tree without touching the water. And then at some point, I was about 10 or so, they cut down the mangrove. They cut down the mangrove to build a road, and they use the wood to pack the road. And they eventually never actually built the road, you know. They abandoned it. And so in my own self, I became an environmental activist because I was so angry that they cut down these mangroves. So having, as was raised by various speakers, our children, having this connection with nature by just being there, not requiring for them to write anything to be examined in an examination, but just to enjoy the communicative and inspirational spirits of nature so that it can generate within them that love for nature is extremely important in helping them to see and to develop within them a concept of citizenship that is rooted in this love for nature. And that is how you're going to get not professional environmentalists, but a sort of consciousness that will help them to develop their own responsibility to nature and to see our relationship together, but also to hold people accountable for this type of development that Ambassador Blake really classified as anti-development. And so I am very, very, very pleased with today's presentation. And tomorrow we have a good amount of presenters, and we hoping to get the same out of them, and we know we'll get the same, if not more. And where we go from here is to document these things and to help to develop teaching methodologies out of the various experiences that you have related today, so that we can become better stewards as teachers, as educators, and in endowing that in young people. So thank you very much for your presentations. I really appreciate it very much. And we at the ITA, the Institute of Technology, really thank you for what you have done for us today. Thanks again.
You're welcome. And when you come to movie, I'll take you over to the mangrove, what's left. Right up, because I used to skip on those mangroves.
I'll enjoy that.
Yeah, man.
Yes.
All right.
Oh, yes, man. I used to enjoy it so much. Thank you.
Thank you too.
So see you tomorrow, everyone, at 10 a.m., where we continue in our exciting and informative series. Much to look forward to. See you soon.
Okay, see you tomorrow. Dr. Hutton,
Yes.
I know we finished, but me and my friends used to race at